Well, first things first, everyone, hello. MuraCon's almost over with. Hopefully you're not that happy about it, but it is, all good things have to come to an end. So, we've done a lot of demos and not every demo has gone well. So I remembered back to this conference. It was a DockerCon in Seattle. And what they did is they offered a little something to the demo gods, the old demo gods and the new. What they did is they took a little sip of coffee before they started as a little small token of appreciation. So that's what I'm doing right now, along with Paul. So excuse us while we
all right. Cheers.
Cheers to the demo gods. All right.
Yes.
Let's move on to Yeoman. Has anyone here heard of Yeoman before? I have one or two hands. 3 hands. Amazing. That's great news. Well, if not, you now are going to be able to learn a little about it. At a bare level, it's sort of a scaffolding framework. Awesome. You already have that.
I have
there
the
you go.
slides.
Yeah, I'm stepping right all over you.
No, it's fine.
I'll just do a little high-level thing. I find it very interesting because it's supposed to let you get going very quickly in your web projects. And it's supposed to be a nice, lightweight scaffolding system so that you don't have to do any of the grunt work. And I'm going to turn it now over to Paul. I think you have a little more in-depth insight into it, so go for it, my friend.
Yeah, so essentially like you're building, so it's a scaffolding software. So when we're dealing with Docker and Mura, there's some like essential sort of, I guess, variables or things that you can put into these config files before you spin it up so that, you can have like a, for Docker, it could be your HTTP host, or so you can send it to your correct local host instead of just 127, .0.0.1. There's also things in Mura where we can set up things in the settings.ini, and what Yeoman helps us do is when you plug it in, you put these variables in, they get slugged right in, and then it generates those files for you. So the next thing all you have to do is Docker compose up, and then you're ready to go. So the Yeoman generator is actually pretty cool. One thing I learned is that Yeoman generator doesn't necessarily mean, even if you download it into your node like sort of library, it's not going to work because it's not actually loaded up into the Yeoman repo, so to speak. So you have to do npm link so that the Yeoman code knows that you just want to look locally.
Yeah, and this is probably more important during development. You don't necessarily always have the option of taking your code and putting it in the Yeoman repository. So as Paul and I were kind of working through this, more specifically Paul, I asked him to kind of get his hands dirty, and that's the first roadblock he hit was if you're developing it locally, you need to also let npm know about it. So as you go through using your Yeoman commands, it says, oh, actually I've got a local copy here. So yeah, any development, or even just if you're going to test this out, that's kind of the first step you'll have to do.
So Mura, what is it? I think everybody knows, right? So we're just going to skip right past this slide, and we're going to go right to Docker. So what is Docker? So basically, from what my understanding is like it's using these file system containers, or so that it seemed like before you always had to sort of have like, your local host would do this and your Apache server would do that, and you had this sort of weird, like, I'm not 100% sure if everything's going to work when I push it to production, and like the Docker for me sort of, it eliminates all those consistencies, and you're able to use those said containers sort of over and over and over and over and over again to eliminate some of that. And they definitely have less resources than the typical virtual machines or Vagrant even. And
absolutely, yeah. It definitely makes running code in a Docker container very easy because it's very lightweight and it doesn't seem to hose your system or slow it down.
Right.
So it's been a tool that we've used very heavily in our professional services development. And so we're just looking for ways to extend it and maybe have it interoperate with other tooling out there. In this case, we're looking for Yeoman. And so this is kind of just experimental. This may end up going someplace. We may put this public. We should put this public just as like a proof of concept. But it's more about just thinking of ways to increase the tooling around Mura. Because these industry standards, Yeoman's one, Node is one, npm package manager is one, Docker is one. All these tools can help you develop Mura at a much faster pace than just copying and pasting from the previous project. If you have a starter kit, and if it's in Yeoman, and if you have a Docker compose file, you can get up and running very, very quickly, kind of as a clean slate, but still not so clean that you can't get going.
Right. One of the other known issues with the Docker was that I found out the hard way is that by default, it uses your home directory as the naming of the containers. So what happens is as I was sort of building up my containers and then trying new containers, there was still, I'm like, it was caching or I thought it was caching, but it wasn't actually caching. It was just saying, hey, I already have these containers, so I don't need to build any new ones. So even though I was like renaming certain aspects of it with Yeoman and all that was working in the profiles, everything kept blowing up because none of the containers were right.
Basically, if you name the folder the same, if you have a profiles folder and you do if you Docker compose up, it's going to use profiles as the implicit name of your Docker containers. So in this case, Mura seems pretty common. You probably put Mura in the Mura folder. So if you happen to have many project folders all named Mura, you're going to get a bunch of Docker containers all also named Mura, which sort of makes this a little more complex. So I guess our recommendation is it's a known issue. It's sort of a Docker compose implicit naming. And so our recommendation would be just make sure your project names are unique, and then we're good.
And it didn't even seem to matter like if it was down a level, it would still use the containers that had those names because it's still on the system. So it's not localized to just that folder. So you can't just put it in like another folder in another folder. Docker's smart enough to say, I don't have to spin these up again. I think that was the issue. It was like, no matter what I did.
Yeah, it found the image locally and said, I'm going to use the local image.
Right.
I don't want to spend the time to rebuild it.
So if you do have to use the same folder, or you've OCD like me, and I was like, no, it has to be in the Mura folder because that's what the presentation's on. One of the things you can do is once you get it all compiled, if you run the rm-f, it sort of blows out all of the containers, and then you still have to do a build because we needed to build up Lucy with all the new features that we wanted and MySQL and spin up the database so that everything was working correctly. So just two other gotchas that, if you want to use it, you might have to do that if you want to use it over and over and over again. So let's have a look at what actually is going on. So we're in the Mura folder, and basically,
If you hit command and then plus sign, you can actually increase that.
Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot. You can see all the other stuff too.
Slightly better. There you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Can everybody see that? So you just type in Mura. And now it's gonna start going through some of the Yeoman. This is like the Yeoman scaffolding. So basically, I can show this later, but in the Yeoman file, you set up all of these things where you can say, hey, what do you want this to be named? And then you use those variables all throughout Yeoman when it's building up the project. So this will be Mura 7. Oop. So the tagline. Name of the MySQL database would be MuraCon. I don't want to do that. So Mura data source M7. And right there, all of these files have just been created. So we've created now these folders that Docker's going to look at. We've edited and added, Yeoman went through and added in all of the variables that we needed to create sort of a Mura 7 with that tagline, with that database, with that data source name. So just to be 100% sure, the next thing we do is...
Well, yeah, and just interject for a second. I mean, that's something that I have to do every single time I start a new project.
Right.
So instead of copying and pasting and going through each one of those files, you were able to do that in one command and 4 prompts.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, round of applause. Yeah. Good job. I like it.
Yeah. So you could, and the sort of interjection that Yeoman has is limitless. I mean, you could continue to ask questions and then build out more pieces. I'm going to run my 2 commands just so that in case anything was there before. There we go. So now we built it. And you just do Docker compose up. That's it, building.
I hope the demo gods are happy.
Yes.
Let's see.
Can't type, sorry everyone. That's still sort of. Silence.
If I knew a funny joke, I might tell it. But I'm not that funny. I can tell you all about Docker, though.
Yeah.
So right now, the web instance is trying to start up. The database instance has done a good job. So it looks very well started up.
Two guys give a MuraCon presentation.
Exactly. This is par for the course, unfortunately. So we do recognize that Steve earlier on presented another way to actually get Mura up and running, and his way also works. And hey,
So there we go. So not only did we spin it up, but then we also created a new site. So this is actually the Mura 7 site within Mura, and we used some of the site config beans to on spin up, start up, and do this. So not only are you getting into Mura immediately, you are also not working with the default site, which is normally not what we recommend. So just to show you, you can see like all these new folders have been created, some by Mura, some by Yeoman, and then within the Mura folder, we have our brand new Mura 7 site. Oh wait.
If you can zoom in, I think hit Command or Control. And use your mouse, hit Control, and then 2 fingers just zoom in, I think. Never mind. It works, I think, if you have a certain setting enabled, so.
All right.
It is what it is. We believe you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not actually part of the demo, so I'm just going to let that go. But anyway, so we have this environment, these environment settings, but where we're actually building the site is in this settings.custom_vars, right? And that's big. So anyway, that's a little better, right? So here we have yo.site, yo.check. So these are all, we're loading the settings bean, we're bringing in our site ID, and the variables like this are what Yeoman is setting for us. So you can see here, this is the Mura 7. This is what we said we were going to call the site. Here's the tagline that I put in, and we're defining that, and then we're building a new site. So you can just go in and start editing it. Just to show you some of the index.js. So this is kind of the Yeoman JS that it's just going to run through. It sets a prompt, and then you're telling whatever the response is to bind it, and then use it in, your next call.
I'm going to put you on the spot with the question.
Okay.
How hard is it to add a new item, like a new prompt? Like, let's say I needed to also ask for favorite color or something like that.
It wouldn't be hard at all. So you have tagline, you have database. So basically, if you just sort of copy this here.
I guess a better sort of realistic question could be email server. Or,
okay.
Admin email or something
right.
like that. So
yeah.
It seems very easy, actually.
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, you just add another function. You just have to be sure everywhere that it said tagline or everywhere it says the one that you copied, you would have to, make sure that you changed it there, and then the response. So then what happens is once Yeoman has this, you have all of these sort of, template files, right, is the best thing to call them. Mm-hmm. And here's the ones that we set in Mura. So what you do in here is, in that config file, you can see here where you have slug app name. All slug does is basically take any spaces or things that we don't like in our site IDs out. You can set up slug where it can either take all the spaces out, or it can add in hyphens, underscores, things like that. I just took the spaces out in case you put them in there. So we're setting, this is basically like every piece that we're pulling in from Yeoman, we're just setting it here. And we're doing that in all of these template files. And then what Yeoman does is, after you've done all that and you've added them in, it takes them out of this Yeoman folder, and it creates the Docker folder on the level up from the app. and it drops in all the files that are there with those new variables in there. So it's this is basically like this is the hardest thing about setting up these things is the Yeoman thing. Like once it starts doing its thing, it's just really easy. I mean, you saw, of course it felt like 2 days while it was spinning up, but it's actually pretty fast. So you can log in. I put the tagline up there so you could see it, but the login would just be admin, just, change it. But
Don't change it to 1, 2, 3, 4.
No.
Make it something secure.
Should be telling everybody my password.
Yeah, I know. That's awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, if there's any questions about it.
Now's the time. Any
Yeah.
questions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm
comments?
gone after this, so you got kids off.
All right, I guess not. Well, thank you, Paul. Paul did pretty much all the work. I'm up here, I'm the talking monkey, so thanks to Paul.
All right, thanks.